The engine coughed, a desperate rattling sigh, and then died. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as the old Ford Ranger coasted to a stop on the gravel shoulder outside Port Eternity, Maine. The scent of salt and pine, bracing and clean, was a stark contrast to the stale cigarette smoke that had permeated my clothes for the past month. I'd lost everything in Atlantic City. My apartment, my meager savings, even the last shreds of my self-respect. All that was left was a crumpled newspaper clipping found in a dive bar, advertising a caretaker position at the Eternity Light. It felt like a desperate last-ditch effort, a physical manifestation of my flight from failure. 4 days I'd driven, the crumbling asphalt of countless highways stretching behind me like a phantom limb, each mile a further separation from the wreckage of my life. Port Eternity was less a town and more a stubborn collection of weathered shacks clinging to a rocky coastline. A single general store, its windows perpetually fogged with damp, cast a weak yellow glow onto the deserted street. The sky was bruised with the promise of an early winter storm, the air already thick with a bone-deep chill. Pushing open the store's creaking door, the bell above chimed a mournful, solitary note. Inside, a woman with a face like carved granite wiped the counter with a practiced, almost weary hand. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, assessed me with an unnerving thoroughness. "Coffee?" she grunted, already reaching for the pot. "Please," I managed, my voice a little hoarse, sliding onto a worn stool. "I'm here about the lighthouse caretaker job." She poured a mug of black, bitter coffee, steam rising in the cool air. "That's a lonely post, son," she said, her voice gravelly. "Not many stick it out for long." She gestured with her chin toward a bulletin board tacked with faded notices. "Silas, the current keeper, will be in tomorrow morning. You can talk to him then. But don't expect it to be easy." The next morning, the air was sharper, the sky a leaden gray. An old man named Silas, his beard as white and abundant as sea foam, was waiting at the small, rickety dock. He had a battered rowboat, its paint chipped and peeling, tied to a barnacle-encrusted piling. "You the one about the light?" he asked, his voice raspy from years of shouting over the wind and waves. I nodded, and without another word, he gestured for me to get in. He rowed with a practiced ease, the oars dipping silently into the choppy water. The Eternity Light stood defiant on a craggy islet, a stark white sentinel against the churning gray ocean. It was taller, more imposing than I had imagined, a testament to enduring against the relentless power of the sea. 20 years I've been managing this light," Silas said, his gaze fixed on the powerful beam sweeping across the waves. "And before me, my father and his father. Simple work, most of it. Keep the lamp burning, keep the records. Just listen to the sea, son, and she'll tell you what you need to know." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of brine and old oil, a faint metallic tang lingering in the air. He led me up the spiral staircase, its worn treads groaning under our weight, to the great lantern room. The Fresnel lens, its polished brass gleaming, dominated the space, an intricate clockwork mechanism slowly, silently rotating it. On a small, scarred wooden desk, a thick, leather-bound logbook lay open, its pages yellowed with age and stained with what looked like dried seawater. "Every keeper before you has kept this book," Silas explained, his voice softening slightly as he touched the cover. "Sales, incidents, anything unusual. The light, she knows more than we do." I flipped through a few pages. Most entries were mundane weather observations, fuel levels, notes on minor repairs. But interspersed were unsettling notations, scrawled in different hands, some firm, some shaky. Whispers in the fog, 0300, not human. Shadows on the rocks, moving with the tide, too many. Light flickered in unison with a distant, unheard bell. The entries were dated decades apart, Yet the chilling consistency of the phenomena was striking. Silas left just before dusk, rowing back towards the mainland, his silhouette shrinking against the darkening horizon until it vanished entirely. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the relentless roar of the ocean and the mournful groan of the wind howling around the glass lantern room. I lit the lamp, the powerful beam cutting a blinding swathe through the encroaching darkness. As I logged the first entry, November 1st, 2025, 1830, Jake Miller commencing duty. Light fully operational, I heard it. A faint tapping on the glass of the lantern room, soft and rhythmic, as if something was trying to get in. I peered out, but saw nothing but the swirling mist and the endless heaving ocean. I told myself it was the wind, perhaps a piece of ice caught in the panes. The first hours passed in a strange, uneasy trance. I checked the oil levels, polished the brass, and stared out at the unbroken expanse of black water. The tapping returned, more insistent now. It was a rhythmic, almost musical sound, like a child's fingers drumming on a pane of glass, persistent and unnerving. I shined my flashlight against the glass, the powerful beam vanishing into the thick fog that had swallowed the horizon, rendering the world beyond the light a uniform, impenetrable white. The tapping grew louder, echoing in the confined space of the lantern room, a stark counterpoint to the steady whir of the clockwork. Then a voice, soft and mournful, seemed to emanate from the very air around me. A chilling whisper carried on the salt-laden air. "Let me in. It's so cold. They're waiting." My blood ran cold. My mind screamed for a rational explanation. The wind, the acoustics of the tower, my own frayed nerves. But the voice was too clear, too sorrowful. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the railing, gripping it until my knuckles ached, forcing myself to ignore it, to focus on the rhythmic sweep of the light. The light continued its slow, hypnotic turn, illuminating nothing but the swirling white void. Around 3 a.m., the fog seemed to press closer, thickening around the lighthouse until I could see nothing but a swirling gray wall, an oppressive blanket that muffled the sound of the waves. Then I saw it. A faint, glowing form just outside the glass, shimmering like heat haze, indistinct and ethereal. It was small, no bigger than a child, and as it drifted closer, I could make out what looked like a tiny hand, pressing against the glass, leaving a faint, ethereal frost in its wake. My breath hitched in my throat. The frost coalesced into letters, forming a single, desperate word, stark white against the dark glass. Lost. The air in the lantern room plummeted, my breath fogging before me, the cold a sharp physical ache. I stared at the word, my heart hammering against my ribs, until, as suddenly as it appeared, the glowing form and the frost vanished, leaving only the endless fog and the rhythmic turning of the lamp. I stood there, trembling, the cold slowly receding, leaving behind a profound chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. I wasn't alone here. I never had been. And the light, it had been trying to tell me. The old pickup coughed and died on the shoulder of Route 19, a forgotten stretch of blacktop baking under the Arizona sun. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the distant hum of power lines and the dry rustle of tumbleweeds. My savings, systematically devoured by a disastrous poker game in Vegas, were utterly gone. All that remained was a desperate, almost mocking lead about a job I'd found tacked to a bulletin board in a greasy spoon diner. Caretaker at the Last Chance Roadhouse. The name alone felt like a bad omen, a sardonic comment on my current predicament. The Roadhouse was a squat, adobe building, its whitewash peeling like sun-scorched skin. A single battered neon sign flickering erratically proclaimed, "Eats and Gas," a lonely beacon in the vast, empty desert. Dust devils, miniature tornadoes of grit and sand, danced across the gravel lot as I pushed open the screen door. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale grease, a faint metallic tang, and the cloying sweetness of cheap air freshener struggling a losing battle. A woman with a tired smile and eyes that seemed to have absorbed the endless desert horizon sat behind the counter. Her skin was a roadmap of sun and worry. "Water?" she asked, her voice dry, already reaching for a worn plastic pitcher. "Please," I croaked, my throat raw from the dust and the long drive. "I'm here about the job." She poured a glass of lukewarm water, a film of dust already settling on its surface. "It's a long shift, son," she said, her voice softer now. "Midnight to dawn. Not many like the quiet out here." She gestured with her chin towards a wall covered with faded, curling flyers for long-gone bands and forgotten events. "Elias, the owner, he'll be in later. He's particular about who he hires." Elias arrived just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and purple. He was a man as gnarled and tough as the desert mesquite, his face a landscape of deep wrinkles. His handshake was like sandpaper, surprisingly strong. 20 years I've been running this place," he said, his gaze sweeping over me with an unnerving intensity that seemed to take in everything and nothing. "Simple work, pump gas, cook burgers, keep the place clean. Just listen to the desert, son, and she'll tell you what's coming." The interior of the roadhouse was dim, lit by bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling, casting long, shifting shadows. A vintage jukebox, its chrome dulled by years of neglect, hummed softly in the corner, a relic from a forgotten era. Elias led me to a small back room, a cramped office with a single unmade cot. "This is your sanctuary," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "The desert gets strange after dark." On the desk, a battered ledger lay open, its pages thick and yellowed, filled with years of careful script. "Every keeper before you has kept this book," he explained, running a calloused finger down a column of faded numbers. "Sales, incidents, anything unusual. This roadhouse, it knows more than we do." I flipped through some entries. Most were mundane, recording gas sales and diner orders. But interspersed were unsettling notations, scrawled in various hands, some hurried, some meticulously neat. "Wind chimes ringing with no wind. 100. Felt a presence. Whispers in the dust, felt like my name, not human." Car drove through the lot, no one inside, left tracks of pure shadow. The dates spanned decades, but the descriptions held a chilling consistency. Elias departed as the last vestige of light bled from the sky, his pickup truck vanishing into the vast, darkening expanse. The silence that descended was absolute, a heavy blanket broken only by the distant, mournful howl of a coyote. I logged my first entry. November 1st, 2025, 2100 hours. Jake Miller, commencing duty, all systems nominal. As I closed the book, a faint rhythmic tapping started on the windows, like dry leaves skittering in a phantom breeze. I looked out, but there was nothing, only the vast, star-pricked darkness stretching to an unseen horizon. The first few hours passed in a surreal quiet. A solitary trucker, his rig hissing like a giant beast, pulled in for gas around 10:30, buying a coffee and a bag of jerky. He glanced around the empty diner, his tired eyes lingering on the shadows. "First night, huh?" he grunted, before driving off into the darkness, leaving me alone once more. Later, the tapping grew more insistent, accompanied by a low, guttural murmur that seemed to rise from the very sand itself. A faint, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the floor. It sounded like a language, but not one I'd ever heard. Ancient and unsettling, echoing in the vast emptiness. I peered through the grimy window, trying to pierce the darkness, but saw only the shifting shadows cast by the sparse exterior lights. Then, a faint scratching began at the back door, rhythmic and relentless. It sounded like fingernails dragging across wood, growing steadily louder, closer, moving around the building as if something was circling. I gripped the counter, knuckles white, forcing myself to look away, to focus on the mundane task of wiping down the coffee machine, my heart hammering against my ribs. Around 3 a.m., the air in the roadhouse became inexplicably heavy, charged with a strange, oppressive static. The old jukebox in the corner, which had been silent for hours, suddenly whirred to life, its internal mechanisms groaning, playing a mournful, forgotten country tune. The music warped and stretched, as if the record was melting, the singer's voice elongated into a ghostly wail. The flickering neon sign outside seemed to pulse, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls, twisting the familiar forms of the diner into monstrous shapes. Then I saw it. A faint, shimmering heat haze formed in the center of the room, slowly coalescing into a vague, humanoid shape. It had no distinct features, just a swirling vortex of shimmering air. But I could feel its gaze on me, a chilling intensity that seemed to drain the warmth from the room. As it slowly drifted closer, the air grew searingly hot, like standing before a furnace. The heat oppressive and suffocating. A faint, desperate whispering carried on the waves of shimmering air reached my ears. Too hot, trapped, no escape. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the lock on the small office door, slamming the ancient wood shut behind me. The groan of the door echoed in the sudden silence, and I huddled in the corner, pressing my hands over my ears, until the suffocating heat subsided and the strange humming of the phantom jukebox faded into nothing. The only sound left was the pounding of my own heart in my ears and the vast, empty silence of the desert. My last good decision had been leaving Denver after the market crash. The rest had been a cascade of abysmal choices that landed me here. The once promising biotech career had evaporated, leaving me with nothing but a string of failed experiments and a mountain of student loan debt. My car, its engine protesting every upward climb with a desperate whine, barely made it to the remote turnoff for the Blackwood Observatory. A faded, almost mocking advertisement in a dusty gas station promised solitude and decent pay. A stark, tempting contrast to the buzzing, suffocating desperation of the city I'd fled. It was my last resort, a plunge into the unknown. The observatory was a squat, concrete dome, an alien structure perched precariously on a jagged peak, surrounded by a dense, primeval forest of snow-laden pines. The air was thin, biting with the crisp, almost metallic chill of early winter. A single, rickety cabin, its windows dark and uninviting, stood 100 yards away, shrouded by the encroaching shadows of the towering evergreens. I pushed open the heavy steel door of the main building. It groaned, a deep, unsettling sound that echoed in the cold silence. The air inside was cool, smelling faintly of ozone and old, brittle paper, with an undercurrent of something undefinable, something ancient. A woman with a severe bun pulled so tight it seemed to stretch her skin, and spectacles perched on her nose, looked up from a stack of charts. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were piercing, dissecting me with unnerving precision. "You the new assistant?" she asked, her voice precise, almost clipped. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, feeling the altitude press on my ears, a dull ache behind my temples. "Jake Miller." She nodded, a curt, almost dismissive gesture, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Dr. Eris, this is a quiet post, Mr. Miller. The stars don't suffer fools lightly, and they listen." She gestured towards a narrow, dimly lit hallway. "Your quarters are in the cabin. Come back at sundown. The night sky waits for no one." Her final words, delivered with chilling calm, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. As the last rays of sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the horizon in streaks of fiery orange and bruised purple, Dr. Eris explained my duties. She was a woman of few words but sharp intellect, her presence as cold and stark as the landscape outside. Simple work: monitor the instruments, log the data, keep the dome clear of snow. Just listen to the cosmos, Mr. Miller, and it will tell you its secrets. Things you might not want to hear. The interior of the observatory was a labyrinth of humming machinery and blinking lights. A sterile, almost alien environment. The telescope, a massive gleaming instrument of polished steel and glass, filled the center of the dome, its immense lens pointing silently towards the heavens. On a small, bolted-down table, a thick, leather-bound journal lay open, its pages yellowed with age, its spine cracked. "Every assistant before you has kept this record," she said, her voice a low murmur in the cavernous space. "Observations, anomalies, anything unusual. This sky, it knows more than we do." I skimmed through entries, a cold dread beginning to coil in my gut. They started as meticulous scientific observations, but quickly devolved into something far stranger. Faint hum from Andromeda, not natural. 2,200. Persisted for hours. My head aches. Shadow passed across the moon, too fast, too large. Not a cloud, not a satellite. Stars rearranged themselves for a moment, then snapped back, like they were recalibrating. Another entry, scrawled in a panicked hand. "The whispers are getting louder. They want to come through. The light, it's a doorway." The dates spanned years, decades, but the unsettling consistency of the observations was a chilling testament to the persistent strangeness of this place. Dr. Aris left as the first pinpricks of starlight pricked the velvet blackness of the sky, her footsteps echoing down the corridor before the heavy steel door hissed shut, sealing me in. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the constant low whir of the instruments and the wind beginning to keen outside. I logged my first entry, my hand surprisingly steady. November 1st, 2025, 1900 hours. Jake Miller commencing duty, all instruments nominal. As I closed the journal, a faint, high-pitched whine started, emanating not from the instruments, but from the very air itself. It grew in intensity, a pressure against my eardrums, a sound that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. I looked up at the vast, clear dome, seeing nothing but the infinite tapestry of stars, unblinking, indifferent. The hours bled into the deep night. The whine escalated, becoming a discordant symphony of clicks and whispers that seemed to reverberate within the very bones of the building. It sounded like countless voices, distant and distorted, speaking in an unknown tongue, an alien communication that seemed to bypass my ears and embed itself directly into my mind. I peered through the telescope, adjusting the focus, but saw only the familiar, unblinking eyes of distant galaxies, their light mocking my growing terror. Then the stars outside the dome seemed to shimmer, their light wavering as if seen through rippling water or through a veil. A single distant star, brighter than the rest, pulsed rhythmically, then began to shift, slowly, imperceptibly drifting out of its accustomed place in the constellation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but I forced myself to remain calm, to simply observe, to log the impossible. The observatory's internal lights, already stark, began to flicker erratically, casting monstrous, dancing shadows across the curved walls, twisting the familiar into the grotesque. Around 3 a.m., the air in the observatory thickened, becoming heavy with an inexplicable sense of vastness, an oppressive presence that seemed to condense the entire cosmos into this single, confined room. The humming of the instruments intensified, rising to a painful, almost piercing crescendo that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The massive telescope, unbidden, began to slowly rotate, its gears groaning softly, its immense lens silently tracking something unseen in the darkest reaches of space. The cold deepened, seeping into my very marrow, a chilling cold that penetrated my heavy parka as if it wasn't there. Then, on the polished surface of the telescope's mirror, reflecting the view, it appeared. Not a reflection of the interior, but a fleeting, distorted image of something immense and silent, moving just beyond the dome. It was vast, formless, a colossal shadow against a backdrop of swirling starlight, a hole in the fabric of reality. As it seemed to drift closer, the very structure of the observatory groaned, the lines of the room bending, the lights flickering so violently they plunged the room into momentary blackness with each flash. A profound, chilling silence fell, deeper than any silence I had ever known. A silence that felt like the end of everything, like the universe itself was holding its breath. I stumbled back, my hands pressed over my ears, not to block out sound, but to contain the scream building in my chest until the silent behemoth had passed and the normal hum of the observatory returned, leaving me alone in the cold, humming silence, profoundly, terrifyingly changed.